The morning ritual began at 6, same as always. I filled the water bottles methodically, checking each spigot to ensure proper flow. Fresh hay went into each feeding station as eager noses pressed against wire mesh in anticipation. The rabbits recognized me, their caretaker, their provider. Each hutch received its special attention. Pregnant does got extra calcium supplements. Growing kits needed protein boosts. And the show rabbits required their specialized vitamin mix to keep their fur in competition condition. My backyard setup had grown steadily over 6 years. What started with 2 pet rabbits had evolved into a respectable small-scale breeding operation, featuring 20 custom-built elevated hutches arranged in neat rows. The garden shed had been converted to store premium feed, breeding records, and the growing collection of competition ribbons my rabbits had earned at regional shows. I never intended to become known for breeding show-quality silver fox and Flemish giant rabbits, but passion has a way of growing when you find something you love. The crown jewel of my collection lived in the largest hutch at the end of the main row. Thunderbolt was a massive Flemish giant buck weighing nearly 20 pounds, with glossy black fur and unusually intelligent eyes that tracked movement with almost canine awareness. He had won Best in Show 3 years running at the state fair, and his genetics were in high demand among serious breeders across the region. Unlike most rabbits, Thunder seemed to recognize not just me, but also strangers, becoming alert and territorial when unfamiliar people approached his domain. I ran my hand along his powerful back as he pressed against the mesh. "Good morning, big guy," I said softly, as he accepted the offering of fresh dandelion greens, his dark eyes fixed on mine with that strange intelligence that had always set him apart from other rabbits. The neighborhood around us was picture-perfect suburban America. Maple Lane featured identical 2-story homes with manicured lawns and tasteful landscaping. When we moved in 4 years ago, the homeowners association rules seemed reasonable enough. No broken-down vehicles in driveways, trash cans stored properly, lawns maintained regularly. The monthly HOA fee covered snow removal and maintained the small neighborhood park, which seemed like a fair arrangement. Our neighbors were mostly pleasant. The Johnsons to the left had 2 small children who loved to visit the rabbits on weekends. Robert from across the street occasionally brought over carrot tops from his garden. Even Mrs. Peterson, the retired teacher next door, would sometimes sit in her garden with a book, commenting on how peaceful it was to hear the soft sounds from the hutches. The only property that shared a direct fence line with my backyard belonged to a woman I rarely saw, a sleek black BMW usually in the driveway, blinds typically drawn. The previous owners mentioned she worked in real estate and traveled frequently. The immaculate condition of her property suggested either considerable effort or professional services. Little did I know that behind those tasteful beige curtains, someone watched my rabbit operation with increasing disapproval. I finished the morning care routine and prepared for work, blissfully unaware that the peaceful coexistence between my rabbit breeding hobby and our suburban neighborhood was about to face its greatest challenge. As I pulled out of the driveway that Tuesday morning, I had no idea that by the end of the month, my quiet backyard would become a battleground, with Thunderbolt serving as an unlikely guardian against a threat I never saw coming. The first envelope appeared in my mailbox on a Thursday afternoon. Unlike the usual bills and advertisements, this one bore the official Maple Lane Homeowners Association logo in the corner. I opened it while walking up the driveway, expecting perhaps a notice about upcoming landscaping work or a reminder about the annual community picnic. Instead, I found a formal warning letter printed on heavy cream-colored stationery. Notice of violation. Section 732 of Maple Lane HOA Covenants. the heading read in bold print. The letter went on to list infractions so minor they seemed almost comical. Decorative river rocks along my flower bed extended 2.3 inches beyond approved border area. A garden hose was visible from street view, and my front lawn grass measured approximately 0.25 inches above regulation height in northwest corner. The letter concluded with a demand to remedy these violations within 7 days, or face a fine of $50 per day per violation. The signature at the bottom belonged to Marjorie Whitfield, HOA compliance officer. I had never met Marjorie officially, but I had a strong suspicion she owned the pristine house that shared my back fence line. The letter seemed excessive for such minor issues, but I had no interest in fighting over such trivial matters. Weekend, I dutifully adjusted the decorative stones, purchased a hose reel to hide the garden hose, and mowed the lawn extra short. 3 days later, while I was cleaning the rabbit hutches, the distinctive sound of expensive heels clicking on concrete announced a visitor. A woman approached through the side gate without knocking or announcing herself. She appeared to be in her 50s, with perfectly highlighted blonde hair cut in an angular bob, designer sunglasses perched precisely on her nose, and a clipboard clutched in manicured hands. "You must be the homeowner," she said, not bothering with introductions. "I am Marjorie Whitfield, compliance officer for Maple Lane HOA. I am conducting a follow-up inspection regarding your violations." "Hello," I replied, standing up from where I had been changing bedding in one of the hutches. "I believe I addressed everything in the notice." Marjorie made a show of checking boxes on her clipboard as she walked around my yard with the confidence of someone who believed they had absolute authority to be there. Her inspection of the corrected violations was cursory at best. What clearly held her attention were my rabbit hutches. "These rabbit structures are becoming quite prominent," she observed with thinly veiled disgust. "How many animals are you keeping here exactly?" 23 at the moment," I answered honestly. "They are show rabbits. I breed silver fox and Flemish giants." She made a note on her clipboard. "I see. Well, we will have to review whether this constitutes a commercial operation. The HOA has strict rules about home businesses and livestock." "They are not livestock," I explained patiently. "They are companion animals like pets, and I am a registered hobby breeder, not a commercial operation." Marjorie smiled tightly, her eyes hidden behind her sunglasses. "We shall see. The board takes neighborhood aesthetics very seriously." With that, she turned and left as abruptly as she had arrived. That weekend, at the neighborhood barbecue in the community park, I discovered Marjorie Whitfield was a topic of significant conversation. Robert from across the street pulled me aside near the drinks table. "I see you got a visit from the HOA hawk," he said quietly. "That woman has been on a rampage lately." "You too?" I asked. 3 violations for my bird feeder being non-conforming to neighborhood aesthetic standards. The Patels got cited because their kids left bicycles in the driveway overnight. The Johnsons received a formal complaint about their garden gnome collection. Throughout the evening, I heard similar stories from other neighbors. Each violation seemed more nitpicky than the last. Many had paid fines rather than face Marjorie's continued scrutiny. I spent Sunday evening meticulously cleaning and organizing the Hutch area, making sure everything was as neat and unobtrusive as possible. Even though I knew the real issue had nothing to do with garden hoses or decorative stones, I hoped that maintaining an impeccable property might keep further conflict at bay. My hopes were dashed the very next morning when I noticed a sleek black BMW driving slowly past my house. From behind the wheel, Marjorie Whitfield's gaze fixed not on my newly compliant yard features, but on the row of hutches visible from the side yard. The look on her face made one thing very clear. This was only the beginning. The next notice arrived just 3 days later. This time, the envelope contained not one but 3 separate violation letters. Unlike the previous complaints about decorative stones and lawn height, these targeted my rabbits directly. The first claimed potential odor concerns from animal waste. The second cited wildlife attraction risk due to feed storage. The third, most absurd of all, alleged excessive noise disturbance from animals. Anyone who had spent more than 5 minutes around rabbits would know these complaints were ridiculous. My hutches were cleaned twice daily with waste composted properly in a sealed bin. The feed was stored in metal containers specifically designed to deter pests. And as for noise, rabbits are nearly silent animals. Occasionally they thump a back foot when alarmed, but even Thunderbolt, my largest buck, made less noise than a neighborhood squirrel. A week later, another set of notices arrived, each more specific than the last. Unsightly structures visible from neighboring properties. Potential health hazards from animal housing. Unauthorized agricultural activities in a residential zone. I spent several late nights hunched over my dining room table, poring through the complete Maple Lane HOA covenant document with a highlighter in hand. The thickness of the binder was intimidating, but after careful examination, I confirmed what I suspected: nothing specifically prohibited keeping rabbits. Pets were allowed without restriction on number or type, provided they did not create a nuisance to neigh. Boars. The document defined nuisance as excessive noise, odor, or danger, none of which applied to my carefully maintained rabbitry. The confrontation happened on a sweltering afternoon in July. I was replacing water bottles when Marjorie appeared at my side gate, clipboard in hand as always. This time she had brought a digital camera and was photographing my hutches before I even noticed her presence. "Excuse me," I called out. "Can I help you with something?" "Official HOA business," she replied curtly, continuing to take photos without asking permission. "I have reviewed the covenants," I said, keeping my voice level despite my rising anger. "There is nothing prohibiting rabbits as pets." Marjorie lowered her camera and fixed me with a cold smile. "The board has broad discretion in interpreting what constitutes appropriate use of residential property. We can be quite creative when addressing ongoing situations that impact neighborhood property values." "Are you threatening me?" I asked directly. "Not at all," she responded with false sweetness. "I am simply informing you that the board takes its responsibility to maintain community standards very seriously. These rabbit structures are becoming an eyesore. Surely you can see how they might affect curb appeal for the homes around you." "My rabbits are pets and show animals. They are well cared for and cause no problems for anyone." "That is your opinion," she said dismissively. "The board may see things differently. I suggest you consider scaling back this hobby before more formal measures become necessary." That night, sleep came fitfully as worries mounted. My rabbits were more than pets or a hobby. They represented years of careful breeding and dedication. Several were rare bloodlines valued by serious breeders. Thunderbolt alone was worth thousands. The thought of being forced to give them up made my stomach knot with anxiety. I woke early the next morning to check on them, a new habit born from growing concern. As I approached the hutches, something seemed wrong. The door to my storage shed stood slightly ajar, though I distinctly remembered latching it the night before. The sight inside made my blood run cold. The storage shelves that had held 50 pounds of premium rabbit feed, specialized breeding supplements, and my meticulously maintained breeding records were completely empty. not scattered by animals or weather, but deliberately cleared out. In their place sat a small white card bearing the HOA logo. Unauthorized agricultural activities prohibited. Final warning. I stood frozen, a mix of fury and disbelief washing over me. This was no longer about petty rules or neighborhood aesthetics. Someone had entered my property, stolen my possessions, and left a threatening note. The feed alone was worth hundreds of dollars, the supplements even more, and the breeding records were irreplaceable documentation of bloodlines going back years. As I clutched the threatening note in my shaking hand, I looked over at the Hutches where Thunderbolt watched me with his intelligent dark eyes. Something hardened inside me. If Marjorie Whitfield thought she could intimidate me into giving up my rabbits through theft and threats, she had severely underestimated her opponent. It was time to gather evidence and fight back. That same day, I drove to the nearest electronics store and purchased a complete security system. I selected small, discrete cameras with night vision capability and motion sensing technology. By evening, I had installed them strategically around my property, one overlooking the Hutches, another pointed at the storage shed, a third covering the side gate entrance, and a fourth with a view of my back fence line. All fed directly to an app on my phone, alerting me whenever motion was detected. Let us see who comes snooping around uninvited now, I muttered as I finished mounting the final camera in a tree branch overlooking the entire backyard setup. For the next 3 days, I jumped every time my phone buzzed with a motion alert, only to discover it was a squirrel, a neighborhood cat, or the wind blowing a branch. But on the 4th day, while I was at work, multiple alerts came through in rapid succession. I ducked into an empty conference room and opened the app to find exactly what I suspected. Marjorie Whitfield had entered my property through the side gate. The footage showed her moving with practiced efficiency around my yard, methodically photographing every aspect of the rabbit operation. She spent particular attention on areas where the Hutches were visible from neighboring properties. Most disturbing of all, she tested the lock on my newly secured feed storage shed, clearly frustrated to find it now reinforced with a heavy-duty padlock. That evening, I downloaded the footage and began a deeper investigation into Marjorie Whitfield and her crusade against my rabbits. A simple online search revealed she worked as a real estate agent with a local luxury property firm. Further digging through public property records uncovered something interesting. Her house, which shared a fence line with mine, had been listed for sale 3 weeks ago, right around the time her campaign against my rabbits intensified. The listing photos showed her immaculate backyard from angles carefully chosen to avoid showing my Hutches. The asking price was ambitious, even for our desirable neighborhood. A call to a friend who worked in real estate confirmed my suspicions. "Oh yeah, Marjorie Whitfield is desperate to sell," my friend told me. "Word among agents is she took a big financial hit in her divorce settlement and needs to downsize quickly. She has already reduced the price once after the first round of showings." This explained everything. My rabbit Hutches, visible from her property, were threatening her ability to sell her house quickly and at maximum profit. Rather than approaching me directly or simply waiting for a buyer who did not mind the neighboring rabbits, she had abused her HOA position to try to force me to remove them. My next step was to try rallying support from other board members. I reached out to Thomas Green, the HOA president, requesting a meeting to discuss Marjorie's actions. His response was cordial but non-committal. When we finally met for coffee, he seemed nervous, constantly checking over his shoulder as if afraid of being seen. "Look," he said quietly, "I understand your concerns, but Marjorie is difficult. She finds violations for anyone who opposes her. My greenhouse, the Wilson's shed extension, the Patel's playset, all technically approved, then suddenly problematic after we voted against her proposals. So everyone just lets her run roughshod over the neighborhood? I asked incredulously. Most people find it easier to comply than fight, he admitted shamefully. None of us have the time or energy for the constant conflict. Frustrated but not defeated, I turned to researching local laws regarding keeping rabbits in residential areas. The County Agricultural Extension Office provided exactly what I needed: clear documentation stating that small-scale rabbit husbandry fell under protected agricultural activities that superseded HOA restrictions in our county. Many people do not realize this, the helpful agent explained, but local governments often protect small-scale food production and animal husbandry from overzealous HOA regulations. Your rabbits are legally protected, even if your HOA tries to claim otherwise. Armed with this knowledge, I returned home with a renewed sense of purpose. That evening, as I reviewed the security footage again, I noticed something I had missed previously. Each time Marjorie approached the area near Thunderbolt's hutch, my champion buck displayed unusual behavior, standing alert, stamping his powerful hind leg aggressively, clearly agitated by her presence. Unlike his reaction to other visitors, who he typically ignored, Thunderbolt seemed to sense something threatening about Marjorie specifically. I watched the footage again, an idea slowly forming. Thunderbolt was no ordinary rabbit. At 20 pounds with powerful back legs, he had the size and strength of a small dog. His territorial nature toward Marjorie specifically might provide the perfect solution to my problem. If she was brazen enough to trespass and steal from me once, she would likely do so again. Perhaps Thunderbolt could serve as more than just a champion show rabbit. He could become an unlikely guardian. As I watched him stamp and pace in his hutch on the video, following Marjorie's every move through the wire mesh, I knew exactly what I needed to do. It was time to set a trap for the real pest in our neighborhood. The plan required careful timing and preparation. First, I needed to ensure the safety of most of my rabbits while setting the stage for Marjorie to incriminate herself. I called my friend Elaine, a fellow breeder who lived about 20 minutes away. "Would you be able to board most of my rabbits for about a week?" I asked, explaining the situation with Marjorie. "Of course," Elaine replied without hesitation. "That woman sounds terrible. Bring them over whenever you are ready." Early Saturday morning, I began carefully loading rabbits into carriers. The Johnsons' teenage son, Tyler, noticed me working and offered to help. "Moving your rabbits?" he asked, concerned. "Mom said the HOA lady has been giving you trouble." "Just temporarily," I assured him while we lifted the heavier cages into my SUV. "A strategic withdrawal, not a surrender." By noon, I had transported 19 of my 20 rabbits to Elaine's property. The only hutch still occupied was the largest one housing Thunderbolt. The massive black Flemish giant watched the activity with unusual awareness, his dark eyes following me as I moved around the now empty hutches. With the rabbits safely relocated, I focused on reorganizing the feed storage area. I purchased new supplies to replace what had been stolen, but instead of hiding them away, I deliberately made them visible. I arranged expensive feed bags so they could be clearly seen through the shed window, with receipts showing their value taped prominently to the front. Inside each bag, however, I had placed a small GPS tracker, similar to those used to locate lost keys. Next, I visited the county agricultural office and obtained official documentation with embossed seals clearly stating that rabbit husbandry constituted protected agricultural activity. exempt from HOA restrictions in our jurisdiction. I made multiple copies, keeping one in my car, one in the house, and giving others to trusted neighbors. Speaking of neighbors, the next phase required building a small coalition of witnesses. The Johnsons had already experienced Marjorie's unreasonable restrictions regarding their children's outdoor toys. Robert across the street had received multiple citations for his bird feeders. Mrs. Peterson next door had been harassed about her garden gnome collection. All had stories of Marjorie's selective enforcement and intimidation tactics. We gathered discreetly in Robert's garage that evening. His wife Susan, who worked in real estate law, provided valuable legal insight. "She has no legal right to enter your property or remove anything," Susan confirmed after reviewing my documentation. "That constitutes trespassing and theft. If you catch her in the act, the HOA board will have no choice but to address her behavior." "And you are certain your cameras will catch everything?" Robert asked. "Yes, but I am upgrading them just to be sure," I replied. "The new system arrives tomorrow, high-definition cameras with night vision capability and audio recording. They will have perfect sightlines to the hutch and storage areas." "What about the rabbit?" Mrs. Peterson asked. "Are you not worried she might hurt him if she comes back?" I smiled. "Thunderbolt can take care of himself. He is 20 pounds of territorial buck. Plus, I am making some modifications to his enclosure." The next day was devoted to setting up the technical aspects of my plan. I installed the new camera system, ensuring complete coverage of the yard with no blind spots. Each camera connected directly to cloud storage as well as my phone, guaranteeing that footage could not be deleted or lost. The most important modification was to Thunderbolt's hutch. I carefully adjusted the latch mechanism on his enclosure, making it appear secure while actually featuring a special design that an intelligent and determined rabbit could potentially manipulate from the inside. Thunderbolt had already demonstrated an unusual ability to open simple latches, and I spent several hours that afternoon training him with treats to work this new mechanism. By evening, everything was in place. The property appeared normal at first glance, but every element had been carefully prepared. The feed was visible but tracked, the cameras were hidden but watchful, and Thunderbolt's hutch was secure yet escapable. As the sun set, I knelt beside Thunderbolt's hutch for a final check. The massive rabbit pressed against the wire mesh, his whiskers twitching as he sensed my tension. "Guard the hutch," I whispered, running my hand along his powerful back. Thunderbolt thumped his hind leg decisively against the floor of his enclosure, as if understanding his role in what was to come. I left a light on in the shed to ensure the feed bags were visible, then went inside to wait. My phone was charged and ready, displaying all camera feeds simultaneously on the security app. The county documents were on the kitchen counter beside my car keys, ready to grab at a moment's notice. Now came the hardest part: patience. Marjorie had already demonstrated her willingness to trespass once. With the temptation of new feed supplies clearly visible, and the apparent absence of most rabbits potentially signaling my surrender, I suspected she would not be able to resist returning to press her advantage. All I needed to do was wait and let her incriminate herself, with Thunderbolt standing guard over his domain. 3 days passed in a state of hypervigilance. I maintained my normal work schedule but checked the camera feeds obsessively throughout each day. Nights were restless, my sleep constantly interrupted to review alerts that turned out to be false alarms: neighborhood cats prowling, raccoons investigating, or simply tree branches moving in the wind. By the 4th day, doubt began to creep in. Perhaps Marjorie had realized the risk was too great. Maybe she had found a buyer for her house who did not mind the neighboring rabbit hutches. I was beginning to think my elaborate trap might never be sprung. Then, shortly after noon on Thursday, my phone erupted with multiple alerts in rapid succession. I was at work in a meeting but immediately excused myself, heart pounding as I ducked into an empty office. The live feed showed exactly what I had been waiting for: Marjorie slipping through my side gate, moving with practiced efficiency toward the feed storage shed. She wore garden gloves and carried a large black garbage bag, clearly prepared to remove my property once again. I grabbed my keys and raced to my car, calling Robert as I drove. "She is there right now. Can you and Susan meet me at my place in 10 minutes?" "On our way," he confirmed without hesitation. As I sped home, I kept one eye on the road and one on the live feed propped on my dashboard. Marjorie had successfully entered the storage shed and was filling her bag with the feed supplies, completely unaware she was being recorded from multiple angles. What happened next, however, was something even I had not fully anticipated. Thunderbolt had noticed the intruder. The camera trained on his hutch showed him becoming increasingly agitated, standing on his hind legs at full height, ears erect and alert. As Marjorie exited the shed with her bag of stolen goods, the rabbit began working at the specially designed latch with determined focus. Just as Marjorie passed near his hutch, Thunderbolt succeeded in pushing through the cleverly designed latch and dropped to the ground with surprising agility for his size. Marjorie turned at the sound, freezing at the sight of 20 pounds of territorial rabbit now free and advancing toward her with purpose. Her scream pierced the afternoon quiet as she scrambled backward, dropping her bag of contraband supplies. Thunderbolt continued his approach, not attacking but herding her precisely as a sheepdog might corral a wayward sheep. His powerful back legs stamped the ground aggressively as he maneuvered her against the fence. I pulled into my driveway just as Robert and Susan arrived from across the street. Mrs. Peterson emerged from her house next door, drawn by the commotion. The four of us hurried through the side gate to find a scene that exceeded my expectations. Marjorie Whitfield, self-appointed HOA enforcer, stood pressed against my back fence, clutching her designer purse to her chest like a shield. Before her, Thunderbolt maintained his position, occasionally thumping a powerful hind leg whenever she attempted to move. The dropped garbage bag lay open nearby, my feed supplies spilling out onto the lawn. The entire tableau was being captured perfectly by multiple cameras. "I believe you dropped something that belongs to me," I stated calmly, holding up my phone to continue recording the scene personally, while the security cameras captured everything from different angles. "Call off your attack, rabbit," Marjorie demanded, her voice shrill with indignation and fear. "Attack rabbit," I replied with exaggerated confusion. "That is just my pet Flemish giant. He must have escaped his hutch. Curious how he seems to recognize you as an intruder on my property." "I was conducting an official HOA inspection," she claimed weakly. "Without notice, entering a locked shed and removing personal property," Susan interjected, her legal training evident in her precise tone. "That constitutes criminal trespassing and theft, not an inspection." "And we have the entire incident recorded," Robert added, gesturing to the visible security cameras, "including audio of your scream when you realized you had been caught. Not to mention the previous theft of feed and supplies," Mrs. Peterson chimed in. "The one where you left that threatening note." Marjorie's face cycled through emotions: fear, anger, indignation, and finally, the dawning realization that she had been caught irrefutably in the wrong. Throughout it all, Thunderbolt maintained his position, his dark eyes fixed on her with uncanny focus, thumping occasionally to remind everyone of his presence. "The HOA board will be very interested to see this footage," I said, picking up the county documentation from my car. "Along with this official certification that my rabbit keeping is protected under county agricultural provisions. But first, I believe we should call the police to file a report about the theft and trespassing. Do not you agree?" The emergency HOA board meeting the following Monday evening saw unprecedented attendance. The community center was filled beyond capacity, with homeowners standing along the walls after all seats were taken. Board members sat uncomfortably at the front table, facing the crowd with varying degrees of apprehension. Thomas Green, the HOA president, called the meeting to order with a nervous glance toward the projector screen set up behind him. "We are here to address serious allegations regarding the conduct of a board member," he began, his discomfort evident. "The complainant has requested time to present evidence." I stood and moved to the front of the room, connecting my laptop to the projector. "Thank you for convening this special meeting," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "What I am about to show you documents a pattern of harassment, trespassing, theft, and abuse of HOA authority." The room fell silent as I presented my evidence chronologically. The escalating notices specifically targeting my rabbit operation, documentation showing no HOA provisions prohibiting rabbits, the county certification of protected agricultural status, the security footage of the first theft of supplies, and finally, the dramatic confrontation where Thunderbolt had cornered Marjorie during her second attempted theft. Throughout my presentation, Marjorie sat rigid in her chair, face flushed with anger. When the footage clearly showed her trespassing and stealing my property, audible gasps and murmurs spread through the audience. "These actions constitute criminal behavior," I concluded. "I have already filed a police report, but I am bringing this to the board first because this represents a serious abuse of HOA authority that affects everyone in this community." What happened next surprised even me. As if a dam had broken, neighbors began rising one after another to share their own experiences of Marjorie's intimidation and selective enforcement. "She threatened to fine me $500 because my daughter's wheelchair ramp was non-conforming to aesthetic standards," one woman declared, her voice shaking with suppressed fury. "My approved garden shed suddenly violated code after I voted against her landscaping proposal," another neighbor added. "She cited us for our cultural holiday decorations while ignoring identical violations from others," the Patels stated firmly. The testimony continued for nearly an hour, revealing a pattern of bullying, inconsistent enforcement, and retribution against anyone who challenged Marjorie's authority. When the board president finally regained control of the meeting, his face was grave. "In light of this overwhelming evidence, the board needs to address these serious allegations." He turned to Marjorie. "Would you like to respond to these claims?" Her defense was as weak as it was predictable claims of maintaining community standards and protecting property values. When pressed about entering my property and removing my possessions, she claimed she was confiscating contraband as part of her duties. Thomas Green looked physically pained as he revealed the final bombshell. "Ms. Whitfield, the board never authorized you to issue many of these violations. Upon review, we have discovered you have been using HOA letterhead without approval and fabricating violations never actually voted on by the full board. Is this correct?" The room erupted in outrage as Marjorie's unauthorized actions were exposed. The vote that followed was unanimous. Marjorie was removed from her position effective immediately, required to pay restitution for all stolen supplies, and the HOA issued formal written apologies to all affected residents. 3 months later, the transformation in our neighborhood was remarkable. Under new leadership, the HOA focused on building community rather than enforcing petty rules. My rabbit operation had expanded with official HOA approval, now featuring educational components for local schools and 4-H clubs. A small sign now hung by the gate leading to the hutches, area protected by buck security systems, with a silhouette of a vigilant rabbit. Thunderbolt himself enjoyed an expanded enclosure, his reputation in the neighborhood now legendary. Children would ask to see the guard rabbit, and he would press against the wire mesh, accepting their admiration and treats with regal dignity. As for Marjorie Whitfield, her house remained unsold, its price reduced 3 times already. Potential buyers invariably heard the story of the former HOA board member who had been outmaneuvered by rabbits and righteousness. Some said it was karma. I preferred to think of it as justice, served one thump at a time by an unlikely hero with long ears and powerful hind legs.